Welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn from Gideon Taylor, replacing legacy applications with PeopleSoft at University of Oklahoma. John, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping here. Please feel free, if you've got questions as we go along, feel free to post those in the chat or in the Q&A. We might choose to take a pause and address those as we go along. Otherwise, we might also choose to hold on to some of those until the end of the webinar, and then we can address those at that time. Everybody will be receiving an email with a link to the recording afterwards. It usually takes a few days to get those out. So certainly by the early to middle part of next week, you should see that, and feel free to review it again at your leisure or pass it on to others who might be interested in this content. We do these webinars on a monthly basis to help organizations explore and understand what the capabilities of PeopleSoft are and how you can extend PeopleSoft to improve the experience, improve the performance, and improve the functionality of your core applications. This slide here is just a quick overview of who Gideon Taylor is. We kind of categorize our services and our solutions in four major areas. In the upper left, PeopleSoft and Fusion applications. We provide full end-to-end consulting services and staffing services for those solutions, including managed services across the entire PeopleSoft product suite, as well as Oracle Fusion Cloud applications. In the upper right, eForms services, that is something that a lot of organizations know us for, is eForms automation inside PeopleSoft. And then also we're getting ready to launch our new GT eForms for Cloud solution, which allows for you to plug eForms into any application you might be using, whether that is on-prem or in the cloud, to be a ubiquitous, enterprise-wide process automation tool to create your own custom self-service applications, regardless of what your application might be. In the lower right, AI and UX, that's a big passion area of ours, helping organizations understand how they can deploy artificial intelligence within their organizations, both from a conversational or chatbot perspective, as well as embedded or agentic AI, and then also enhancing and extending the user experience, not just internally, but also externally. If you've got users of your PeopleSoft systems or other systems that exist outside your organization. And then finally, in the lower left, cloud enablement, helping organizations chart that path, moving PeopleSoft to OCI, but then also helping them manage and maintain any kind of cloud-hosted applications that they might be looking for. We focus and specialize in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, so helping organizations make that move to the cloud and then help them manage and maintain those once they're up there. I think that is it. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to John Webster, solution architect, who's going to lead us through a project overview of what we recently helped the University of Oklahoma implement, the accounts receivable and billing modules for a whole new population. Webby, it's all yours.
All right, how exciting. So I'm John Webster. I'm a solution architect with Gideon Taylor. I've been doing PeopleSoft for around 30 years. So mostly in the financial space with some HCM and campus solutions as well. Today, like Scott said, we're going to talk about a project we recently did for the University of Oklahoma. And so I'm going to set the stage a little bit, talk a little bit about what the requirements were. We'll go into what some of the gaps we found were and what very limited customizations we needed to do. Some scope boundaries so we could clarify what we did with the project, and then talk about the results and our final thoughts. And hopefully if I go too fast or anything, please slow me down. Please, if you have questions, ask in the questions box, and I'm sure Scott will let me know if there's anything I need to respond to right away. So to set the stage, University of Oklahoma had been using a custom billing system external to PeopleSoft for their external billing for their service units and auxiliary accounting, as well as some of their contract accounting. The system was built in Access. The key support resources for it were going to be retiring soon. It was highly customized. And because it was outside of PeopleSoft, you had to integrate to get valid chart fields and all that information. You had to feed that to the system. And then when you had accounting, you had to feed it back. All of this made for a less than ideally secure situation for them looking ahead. So they said, hey, what can we do? We talked, we said, hey, I think most of what you can want to do, you can do it in PeopleSoft. They were having some issues. They had multiple invoice formats. Business rules were captured in code. It was, like I said, it was an access. That operational dependency on key personnel was going to be a real problem coming up soon, and all the interfacing. So what they wanted to do was bring everything into one enterprise model, bring customers in, have a standardized format, reduce risk of having this external system, and actually defining the using the defined AR lifecycle that PeopleSoft already has. And by bringing everything into the enterprise system, you reduce your risk for bad accounting and all sorts of validation issues because everything's integrated already. So that was the stage, and that was our premise. We started the project in late June of 2025, and because of the incipient retirement of personnel, we had to have it done by October 1st. So a tight timeline as well. So for the scope, obviously the key piece of the scope was we had to replace that custom billing functionality. There was also another external application used for accounts receivable. There was a lot of activity happening in these external applications that really need to be brought in-house. The new system would have to produce invoice for external customers. We needed to be able to accept invoice data from the service units. So the university has a number of service units throughout their process that issue bills. And those service units have their own methods, have their own systems to define this data. They would then send this data to the external billing system. It'd be processed, massaged, sent out as invoices. Those invoices then would have accounting loaded to PeopleSoft, but all of the data for that was now in that external system. And we couldn't really affect the service units too much. So we needed to work with what they were giving us to make sure that happened. They needed the system to be able to capture payments, so they weren't having a separate system for AR. They needed the accounting to be integrated with what they were doing. And as an extra feature, the grants group at the University of Oklahoma was already using billing and accounts receivable. They use it in a slightly different way because they're working with sponsors instead of customers, and they're working primarily using project costing and customer contracts and the grants module to generate their billing data. Whereas we'd be looking to get data from external systems, the service units, to feed into billing and then bring that in-house. So we need to make sure that nothing we did had a negative impact to the grants group. And that was very important. We broke our requirements down into the 4 key pieces around customers, billing, receivables, and accounting. And we said up front, we're going for a bare bones system. We want to be able to do what your billing system does and your AR system does, but we're not going to look at a whole lot of other things. We have a very tight timeline. So for customers, they had no real standardization for how they track customers in the custom system. They wanted the customers to be shared between campuses, use a common nomenclature so they could be used, because some of the customers were common to both campuses. They were not the same as grants. Grants had sponsors, so they should be kept separately. They didn't want to overlap in any way with the grants data, so that there'd be less confusion for the grants people who have a very automated process and don't need to think about a lot of this stuff. And they did want to make sure they could track some ancillary data related to specifically the external customers, whether they're state agency, are they tax exempt, are they UBIT applicable, and we wanted to track the old legacy IDs because, like I said, we couldn't affect what the service units were sending us, so we needed to be able to recognize both the legacy customer ID they might send us, and or if they at some point changed to the new updated customer ID, we need to recognize that as well. So we tracked both in the customer data. For billing requirements, ideally they wanted a simple single format for the upload file, so that all of the service units would use the same process to get that data in. The system needed to automatically email invoices to customers. It would correctly calculate sales tax for billing. we wanted to use a single template. The custom system, they would generate a new template for new messages needed on the bills. Rather than letting data drive that, they would actually have a new template for each one. And we wanted to get away from that because that becomes a real maintenance headache to try to keep track which template do I need to update for what. We wanted to make sure that on the upload process that all the data would be validated before processing, so we'd have no errors in the process. And we need to note that the service units and the contracts use separate banking. So the service unit and auxiliary billing used one bank account, while the contracts billing would be using a separate bank account. So we need to make sure all that tracked through. Whoops, sorry, I went backwards on that. My apologies. Then receivables. Again, they had a separate application, not enclosed in the billing system for tracking receivables. They wanted the receivables to be automatically generated from the invoices. They want, obviously, correct accounting generated from the payment application. They want to be able to add attachments so that they got data along with the payments that they could attach that information to it. They wanted to be able to actually track balances better and be able to do better research. And so tracking them by the customer and the item was a bit of a challenge in the legacy system, and we were hoping to make that better. And then for reporting purposes, they need to be able to report state agency balances and things and activity to the state. And then finally, accounting, pretty basic. They want revenue accounting to flow from billing, payment accounting to flow from receivables. They want to make sure that they have the correct accounting with valid chart fields and that those flow throughout the process. And when you're interfacing your data between systems, that can be a problem. So that by having everything in the enterprise system should help make that a lot cleaner. And that, again, no interfaces. Everything's happening in the system. So given all that, we're trying to go for a very vanilla product, but there obviously are going to be some things that need customization. And going into it, we sort of said there were going to be three main areas where we knew that there would be gaps to be filled. The first is up front. When we're interfacing the data into the system, when we get sent data from the service unit, we need to map what they send us, because they're going to send us a very minimal amount of data. And then we need to make it actually usable by PeopleSoft. And PeopleSoft has a lot of requirements in terms of making billing data valid. So the service units are going to send us minimal information, like an account, an amount, what the service unit was that was sending it, so we know who they were, what customer they're billing, a description for each cost that they're sending out, and if it's a contract, there might be coverage dates for what that invoice is supposed to cover. From that, we needed to derive a valid chart field string, so the rest of the chart fields to go along with that revenue. What bill type this should be. Is this a contract or is this a service unit? We need to map to the service unit ID to make sure that we have a bill source for that. The bill by identifier helps group invoices. So if you have an unusual billing situation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, you can have a different bill by identifier tied to that, which will then group those invoice lines into a different method. And then ultimately, we need to make sure that we have a valid load to go into the interface BI table so that then we can process normally throughout billing. And our goal was, once we introduce data actually into the PeopleSoft delivered tables, from then on, there shouldn't be any real customization. That was the goal. To make sure that happened, we obviously then needed to validate everything that the service unit sent us to make sure that that was okay. So in each upload file, every line had to be valid, or the entire file would not load. And that way we kept data clean. They could go back to the service unit and say, hey, something was wrong here. Here's what we need to fix. There were three main areas we were checking. Given they're only sending us like 6 pieces of information, we're pretty much validating everything. Had to be a valid customer ID. Whether they send us a legacy ID or the new PeopleSoft ID, one way or the other, it had to be valid. It had to exist. It had to be a valid service unit. So new service units get spun up, and when they happen, they need to be set up for both in the mapping as well as having a bill source tied to them. So if you don't have a valid service unit, we can't bill for that service unit because we don't have enough information to do that. So it had to exist. And they had to send us a valid account. It had to be an account that was authorized to do billing from, and we had to have it mapped. So it had to exist in all the setup data. Now, one of my big pet peeves with the way I've seen interfaces defined is that when you're doing any sort of validation, a lot of times it'll hit the first error and stop and say, hey, your file had an error, tell you what that error is, which is great, but not tell you about the rest of the errors that might exist. So you fix that one error and the file loads again and you get another error. And I find that extremely frustrating. So one of our core principles was if we throw an error, we want to know everything. So the entire file is checked. All the errors are listed, everything that needs to be fixed, so that they can all be addressed before you try to reload the file. And you don't run into that time waster of, oh, load the file, oh, error, fix it. Oh, load the file, oh, error, fix it. Ugh, makes me crazy. And I'm sure many of you out there can sympathize with that, having run into this in PeopleSoft before. The final thing that we did need to customize is, of course, the invoice format. Because obviously we need to make it unique to the University of Oklahoma, but we had to make sure that we could map all the data into it. So we started from the delivered XML template, and there were 4 bill types, 2 per business unit, one for service units and one for contracts. And because of how PeopleSoft is designed in the delivered process and the way it extracts data for billing, you can drive a lot of what happens on the invoice layout through data. And it all comes from configuration instead of needing to be coded or fixed or keyed into the template. So we were able to take, I believe at the time they had more than 20 different layouts in their custom system with different messaging on each and slight variations, and make it one layout and let the data that we're pulling through the system drive what shows up on the invoice. So we had unique logo for the Norman campus versus OUHSC, the Health Science Center. We had obviously different remit addresses based on the banking data. Customer addresses came from the customer. The data lines came from obviously the interface. There was messaging tied to whether it was a service unit or a contract bill. And we were able to add, if you needed to add in unique messages into the invoice, you could do that at the bill source level for the service unit ID. And that would also feed out to the template and go into certain places. If they had to do a late fee notification or something like that, you could add that in. And all that was data driven, which makes it configuration based rather than coded. And this was really important to them so that they don't have to keep spinning up new invoice layouts for every purpose under the sun. The only other customization we did, and it was tied into the invoice format, was they had a requirement for certain of their receiving systems, certain customers that said the invoice file needs to have the word invoice in it at a certain point. And so we did have to make a minor tweak to the naming convention, and that was actually a code change. And that was really the only code customization we made for this entire process that wasn't related to the initial interface. So, like I said, tight timeline. We were working very hard to make sure we got done for their October deadline. So we had to put some really clear boundaries around what scope we could accept. And I give the University of Oklahoma staff that worked with us enormous credit for being not only open to this, but being enthusiastic about it. Because believe me, when you have a client who says, "Oh, but I really need this, I really need this, I really need this," it's hard to keep saying no all the time. And they were very good about saying, "Nope, we're going for what we need. There will be other opportunities for other things." So we prioritized the stable interface intake, the customer model, integrated accounting, using the delivered AR lifecycle in a pretty much straight line flow and a very clean configuration baseline. But we put off a whole bunch of other functionality that is still available to them, but hasn't been implemented yet, and could very well become useful soon. Collections functionality, late fees, payment predictor. Currently, payments are applied manually, and when you're dealing with hundreds of bills a month, that can be tedious. So, but they were open to that, saying we need to get through this. We need to get this up and running. They didn't do work centers. That again would be another place where they could really see some benefit from looking at some of the exception-based work layouts that the work centers have. And essentially, they agreed with us that anything complex, anything non-essential, is just not valid for this phase of the project. And it's really thanks to them that we were able to get through this so well, because they were very cooperative and collaborative on that. So what did they get? To start off with, the upload process became a much more controlled process. Because we upfront all of the validation and make sure that all of the errors that could happen are found early, before we even do the mapping, they have a lot of controls up front, and they can count on the fact that once they go load that file, if it says it loads into the interface tables, they should be good to go. There should not be any other real errors at that point. It should flow pretty cleanly. Because of that validation's clean, the rest of the process is delivered. So that makes a very controlled path for starting the process. And I think that was a large benefit. And the fact that all the mapping is configurable, so it's run and governed by the users, and not buried in code somewhere, I think also helps make that very helpful. We evolved the customer model, which helps them, I think also helps with some governance gains. Having a naming structure, we maintained the legacy ID. We kept it separate from grants so that they aren't affected. We tracked information for reporting. The customer contacts are used for email delivery. So if you have a customer contact set up correctly, that invoice will automatically email to them when it's generated. And the customers are all shared between the two campuses, so that when they have common customers, they don't need to have call up multiple customers with the same ID. A lot of duplication is reduced. When we went into this, and I will say also that the university did a great job of cleaning up their existing data. When we went into it, they had somewhere around several thousand customers, and they were able to clean those down to about, I think, 1,100. And they had 500 service units, and I think we cleaned those down to like 250 or so. So that also helped. Starting off with a clean data set helped a lot. But now they're working with a much more refined list that should resist duplication, so that they don't end up with the same kind of burgeoning list that they have to then manage. Business logic. We introduced the idea of configuration as control. So the service unit ID keys most of the logic. The mapping drives the billing functionality, because it's going to carry the bill type, the bill source, and the bill by identifier for each service unit. The valid chart field strings are maintained by service unit ID. So we're always going to have the right chart field values attached to that. We did allow for some special purpose accounting in the mapping data. So some service units might have a reason to have multiple revenue codes that they want to send through. And so we were able to give them a facility to map multiple revenue codes and still have valid accounting throughout. The tax applicability is governed by the accounts charged. So if it determines whether a transaction is taxable, whether a customer is tax exempt is governed at the customer level, and the interaction happens automatically. So if you've got a non-tax exempt customer with taxable data, sales tax gets generated and applied automatically. And again, only valid transactions being loaded makes for a lot cleaner process once you start processing that data through. And the standardized invoice. The single template with data-driven formatting, allowing us to drive everything from configuration values means that if you need to change something on the invoice, you can do that by fixing the data, and that will then feed through to the invoice. You do have to be aware of how that data affects the invoice so that you don't affect other invoices by accident, but all of it is governed by data. So it's getting, like I said, the remit information from the banking setup, customer drives the address, contact determines whether it's emailed or not, and the bill type, bill source, bill by identifier influence the messaging and the grouping. All of that is configurable. So there shouldn't be a need, fingers crossed, to really do anything with the invoice template again. Obviously, times change, things change, that you may need another one at some point, but the goal was to really make this as business friendly as I'm going to say tech unnecessary or dev unnecessary. Not that the dev group is unnecessary. They're wonderful people and do a great job, but not having them having to be involved with every little change by being able to drive everything from configuration puts the control in the hands of the business. And that's really where it needed to be. And it's one integrated lifecycle within PeopleSoft, which again, in the old system, they were feeding back and forth, data is flowing back and forth. It wasn't always right. They might have issues with the interfacing. Now we're all within PeopleSoft. From upload the journal, everything is inside the enterprise financial system, which increases auditability. It's a boon all around. Starting from the upload file, it flows into the billing interface, flows into the invoice. You create journals from that information with your revenue data. That invoice flows to AR, updates AR. You might age that invoice before you get paid. And then again, once you get paid, you create accounting for it and you get the cash application journals. And all of that flows within the delivered PeopleSoft process. No need for customization or anything like that. It's all configuration driven. So, final thoughts. In a lot of ways, it started off as just a system replacement, but really it turns into more than that when you think about the implications of what they were able to do. They intentionally moved business rules from custom code into configuration. They replaced informal knowledge and single points of failure support with documented processing, so that the entire business group now knows how all the pieces of this work. So they've got immense amounts of failover coverage. They've got resources within themselves that they can talk to, discuss how things work and change, and they can collaboratively make ongoing changes to the system as needed. They shifted from local logic in their external access system to enterprise governance. So they've got valid chart field strings, they've got valid accounting, they're fitting in the close schedule, everything is feeding within the system. And they embedded billing now into the institutional platform instead of being a separate system with completely separate governance, resourcing, research. Everything's now internal. Operationally, now you've got a controlled intake path. You've got a governed customer model. You've got a data-driven invoice framework, a clear life cycle that flows equally across both business units and across both campuses from upload to cash. And you've got fully integrated accounting, no external interfaces. So you've got a new defined repeatable enterprise process. One of the greatest gains I think they got from this. Reduce their risk. They're no longer dependent on custom code, key individuals, reconciliation surprises, or any of the other factors that might come from having an external system. I mean, suppose that database corrupts. everything's within PeopleSoft. So they increase the transparency of the business rules. Everyone can see everything. Well, within valid security, but all the business rules are available to the business. They now have audit traceability. They can see how accounting got created, how it flowed to the journals. They can see all the steps in the process. And I think that it increases their confidence in the accounting flow. So a lot of gains in visibility, traceability, and decrease of risk. So now their external billing, which is their billing external customers, is now inside the financial system. No hidden logic. It successfully coexists with grants, and there were a number of areas where we had to make decisions that were influenced by decisions grants had already made, and so we had to make slightly different decisions to make sure we didn't impact them. But it does successfully coexist with grants, and they can now both collaborate with grants and work within the system without impacting grants. It's structured for more. As I mentioned when we were discussing the scope limits, there are a number of things that they could add that would probably provide potentially a great deal of value. Collections, payment predictors, so that payment application is a little bit more automated. Working with the work centers so that their workflow is a little bit cleaner and they can see more about exception processing, where things are. There are a number of other transaction types that may or may not be needed for them that could be used. More opportunities for item maintenance. But I think the collections, the late fees, things like that are all things that could be applied at a later date. And it's built for the delivered PeopleSoft lifecycle. So it will continue to advance and evolve as Oracle continues to advance and evolve PeopleSoft. So, any questions, thoughts, comments? It's a lot of me talking.
Oh, somebody's got their hand raised, Webby.
Ooh, how exciting.
Let's see if I can give them the opportunity to talk. I'm going to go ahead and open your mic. Hi there. What's your question?
Yes, my question about this is PeopleSoft does delivered spreadsheet invoice upload template. Have you made use of that feature, or it's a custom one?
I'm sorry, which template?
Just like there is a Excel upload template.
Yes. So there are templates to be used for both, I believe, the billing interface, and I know payment application has there's a deposit upload. We did not use that for this project, but I have used the deposit upload template at other clients, and the deposit upload template is one that could be used potentially here. We didn't do it at this point because the manual application was honestly a quicker way to go. But I do think that the template could be one approach, given how they get their banking data, that could then be used to feed into Payment Predictor and make for a more automated process there. We just couldn't do it as part of this initial project.
All right, that is for the deposits. What about invoice upload?
So I don't know that there's a delivered template. I know you can use the Excel to CI in general to load the interface BI tables.
No. There is a specific template. I have put the online PeopleBooks link in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, we did not use it because we were getting a file that we needed to map. We couldn't get the service units would not be able to give us all the information needed to load that template.
Okay.
So we had to start from what they could give us and then generate the rest of the data using the mapping tables. And so at that point, the template was not going to be useful.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And the auditors are now requesting or insisting on payment card industry compliance. So when the payment is received for these invoices through various ways, whether it could be debit card or credit card or online payment or e-transfer, how does the university ensure PCI compliance?
So I believe that the university, since their payments were all received centrally by the, and I'm going to get this wrong, they have centralized banking. So they're not doing all the specific payment application types in PeopleSoft. They're getting data saying that the deposit's been made with banking data from their banking.
Okay.
So that's happening before we see the payments.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to go to the next
So Webby,
slide. I think.
I was just going to comment that it is really nice to have a customer who is very committed to using the software the way that it's designed, and taking advantage of vanilla as much as possible.
Yes, they did a wonderful job for that, and like I said a couple times, they were also amazing about cooperating with us on keeping scope restrained, and not trying to insist on getting more and more things in when we really had a tight deadline and had to get, I hate to say, a minimal viable product, but it was kind of the goal, to get the basic straight line path through the system configured and up for them. They were very cooperative about that. So kudos to them. And honestly, their team was great. I don't know if any of them were able to join us today, but their team was great. 100%.
That's awesome. Anybody else have any questions? Sean just popped up in the chat. Sean Massey is here from the project team.
Oh, great. Excellent. Hey, Sean.
Sean, if there's anything that you want to comment on, I'd be happy to take you off mute. All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Should I go to the...
All right. Yeah, you can go ahead and flip to the next slide. All right. For those of you who may not be aware, Gideon Taylor is hosting its first ever user conference in conjunction with the Alliance Conference in Orlando, March 8th and 9th. And Ignite, the Gideon Taylor Conference, within the Alliance Conference, is focused on really exploring everything that you can do with making PeopleSoft faster, easier, and better. And that is really what Gideon Taylor is all about. We've always been about that, helping organizations drive greater value and a better experience within their PeopleSoft applications. We're now extending that to Oracle Cloud applications. But first and foremost, there's a lot of really great value that organizations can continue to get out of PeopleSoft applications, whether it's HCM, financials, or campus solutions. And we'll be focusing on that during the Ignite conference. That 2-day conference will include not only PeopleSoft tips and tricks, but also eForms process automation, artificial intelligence, both conversational chatbots, as well as embedded or agentic AI, user experience, helping organizations reimagine how users interact with PeopleSoft and its data. And then also cloud. So helping organizations understand what that looks like to move PeopleSoft to OCI and how you can maximize the benefit of cloud hosting for not only PeopleSoft, but other systems you might have. That QR code will take you to, I think, our program guide for that event, or at least the web page that we've got designated for that. And from there, you can dive into the program guide that features descriptions of all of the sessions. I think there are about 24 sessions that are all focused on getting the most out of PeopleSoft and helping you innovate at a time where there's probably a whole lot of pressure to be looking at SaaS applications, and potentially PeopleSoft alternatives when there's still a whole lot more value that you can drive within your PeopleSoft applications. Next slide. We've got a couple of upcoming Lunch and Learns. As I mentioned, this is a monthly series that we host. Coming up in March, that's going to provide a review of what we learned at the Alliance Conference and at the GT Ignite Conference. So if you're looking for kind of a greatest hits webinar on the latest and greatest within the Alliance community, predominantly higher education and public sector, but PeopleSoft more broadly, that would be a great one to attend. And we'll share our insights and our feedback from what we took away from those conferences. April 16th is going to be looking at e-forms automation within PeopleSoft Financials. So our topics for each one of these Lunch and Learns tend to rotate. Sometimes they focus on e-forms automation inside PeopleSoft. Sometimes they focus on PeopleSoft projects like the one we did today on OU's AR and billing project. Sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's UX. So that one happens to be led by one of our clients in the UK. Bupa Insurance is going to talk about their experience with eForms automation inside PeopleSoft Financials, and then also do a demonstration of some of the forms that they've created over the last few years. And then finally, last but not least, some of the training that we're going to be offering over the course of the next few months. So on an ongoing basis, Gideon Taylor provides training, sometimes general PeopleSoft training, but more so focused on some of the tools and technologies that we provide. So GTE forms, diving into various aspects of that tool. And then also general topics like PeopleSoft Insights and Analytics you see down there coming up in March and June. BI Publisher, if you're interested in learning more about how you can leverage that inside PeopleSoft, coming up in June. I will mention on the middle of that training list, configurable CIs. That's one of the most exciting things that we have introduced over the last year is configurable component interfaces. Most organizations are using that within the context of their GTE Forms tool to allow for business analysts to do that CI development, but it can also be applied to general PeopleSoft. So if you guys are doing custom development and some of that might rely on creating CIs to bring data into PeopleSoft, join us for that. It's a fantastic training, and it's a great way to understand how you can make that a business analyst process and function versus a developer. That QR code again will take you to our training page, which you can find out much more detailed information about each one of those training offerings, as well as the schedules and the costs associated with those. And I think that is it. So I'm going to take a moment to thank our presenter, John Webster, for sharing information about University of Oklahoma's AR billing implementation. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. It's great to be able to share this kind of information with the broader PeopleSoft community. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can find us on the internet at www.gideontaylor.com. You can also send us questions at info@gideontaylor.com, and we're more than happy to respond. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to having you join us for a future webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.